If you want to know all about the Sherwin-Williams paint color Shiitake, and just before we go on, I want to clarify, I could say Shiitake and get a really nice Japanese pronunciation, but just for the sake of this video, we'll stick to Shiitake, okay? As well as an entire color palette that goes with it, picked by me, well, you're in for a real treat because that's conveniently what I'm going to be talking about. This is Color Code, the series where we crack the code on paint colors, and Shiitake's color code is SW9173. The SW in that color code just stands for Sherwin-Williams, which is the company that made the color. The name is pretty spot on because Shiitake is pretty much a mushroom brown that has some gray-red earthiness to it. You could classify it as a color within the taupe family, which typically combines gray and brown together, and taupes are notoriously usable as paint colors within interior design and exterior as well. I love using taupe outside. The big reason for this is because they work alongside gray, brown, beige, essentially the entire neutral color palette in general, because it's sort of has a bit of everything. By incorporating a taupe like Shiitake, it's a great way to inject some depth into an otherwise light color scheme. Speaking of depth, let's talk about how light or dark this color is. And we can do this very simply by looking at its light reflectance value, or its LRV, which is prominently on display on the Sherwin-Williams website. 51 is very much middle of the pack depth-wise, which causes me to wonder how versatile Shiitake is in those open areas of a home like a hallway. It's definitely going to be easier to use than a more saturated color hue or a more blue-leaning gray, which can clash with comparatively warmer neutrals. Just make sure that whatever space you use it in has a sufficient amount of lighting, because windowless rooms may make this color feel a lot darker than it is. Essentially, if you're just a big fan of those lighter gray beige or grayish colors, Shiitake feels like a darker, richer version of that, so you can think of using it in that way. Speaking of grayish, let's get into the first of my several color pairings that create your finished color palette all around Shiitake. It's interesting because this color feels a lot closer to gray when paired next to Shiitake and all of its warmth. The color is called City Loft, and what I love about this color is its very subtle use of beige. In fact, it has less of it than Shiitake, and most of its warmth comes from a bit of brown or red rather than yellow. It's interesting how it only has a 70 LRV, yet feels so light and airy and almost powdery as a color. It has a delicate aesthetic that really suits its name. I mean, I'm in an open loft right now, and it definitely has that open, airy feeling to it. And so does this color. Dang, I wish I used it here. It's okay. I still love my plaster of Paris. City Loft can act as your baseline color in tandem with Shiitake, especially in those areas where you want that more easygoing feel, or the parts of your home that don't get a lot of light and you want something to reflect more light back into the space. I know it's not the lightest color in the world, but it almost acts like a neutral canvas off-white in the grand scheme of things, especially in this color palette. Even if I use this cute little kitchen mat as an example, there's your City Loft, right? There's your Shiitake, kind of, maybe in between. And then the other two colors we're talking about are quite a bit different. They're not here. Passive is a color with a very generic name. And while it may seem pretty generic at first glance, it's actually much cooler than the other two colors with a pretty clear blue undertone. What's funny is, however, looking at the RGB values on the Sherwin-Williams website, the B or blue value is lowest, but you can clearly see the cool undertone present within passive. Let this be a little reminder that although RGB values are useful, don't let them be the be-all and end-all of determining what a color actually is. So in terms of lightness or darkness, it's a 60 LRV, which is pretty much in between the first two colors we talked about. But what it lacks in contrast of depth, you definitely get that complementary cool versus warm dynamic. The color is still defined as a neutral because it is pretty muted and desaturated, but it'll still really pop no matter if you use it in an accent form or in different rooms of your home. The dark color is a bit of a mad science experiment color choice, to be honest. It sort of goes against the sleek, muted, neutral color palette that we've been building so far, but I just didn't want to bombard people with variations of gray, taupe, and beige. Feast your eyes on Bosporus, which is a deep aquatic blue with an LRV of 9. My little backlighting was inspired by that color, by the way. I wouldn't classify this anywhere near a navy blue, even though it is nearly as dark as some, but it introduces some of the warmth found in Shiitake that completes the look. The warmth in Bosporus gives it that slight green undertone, and it feels as teal as you can get while still looking more like a blue. I guarantee you that the color passive will feel even more passive next to something like Bosporus. The white paint color to tie it all together is Cold Foam, which has a bit of that warmth, but it's not necessarily dominated by yellow. It's quite a bit lighter than any other color we've talked about in this palette, so it'll give you that contrast in depth that you're looking for on your trim and your baseboards or your doors and your frames. Here's the whole palette together. Tell me if you like it, and let me know if you plan to use Shiitake in your upcoming project. Here's another taupey color that I'm a big fan of, and I'm sure a lot of you are as well, because it's pretty popular.